Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to check in on my so-called original red wiggler worms, and the food that I've got for them, it's got some good weight to it. There's a whole bunch of potato peels, and underneath the potato peels there's some watermelon rind. And out here on top, if you haven't noticed, rests a couple days worth of coffee, as well as the coffee filters, which will be probably reused in some capacity. Their first job was to filter coffee, but in my worm bins they usually get a new job, and that job is to mark where we last fed. You can almost see the remnants of one of them here, and there was another one right here too, but these are so far gone that these can no longer be used as feeding zone indicators. So then their final transformation that they get is to become supplemental bedding, to be included in the feeding zone if it's not so puny already that it'll just blend in anyway. So if we remember to grab some of that and help blend it in the feeding zone, then we'll do just that. Otherwise it'll just get blended in general somewhere else in the bed. So last time we came in here to feed them, oh boy, we got a nice little turnout down here in the feeding zone. It was 12 days ago. I think intervals between feedings up until that time had been a little bit longer. There was some mention about how intervals between feedings had been 14 days over the past few check-ins, and how the and yeah, so today we're coming back a little bit earlier, but not all that sooner. Alright, so here's a pumpkin stem. What I pulled out earlier is also a pumpkin stem. This thing here, it's starting to fall apart nicely. It's the outer husk of a mango seed, and even has some worms hanging out in it. There was one other fairly slow composting object that was fed to the worms a number of feedings ago, which was the half of a yam. And here we're still seeing the very intact skin of the yam. So I mean, today they're getting potato, I guess a cousin of the yam, but with potato I would never expect for the skin of the potato to last so long that it would just still be here after perhaps a third feeding. I mean, if we went 14 days, maybe 14 days, 28, 30, I mean, we're talking over a month now that yam was fed to the worms originally. And for it to still be here as leftovers is a little bit surprising to me. I wonder if we can help motivate the worms to work on it a little bit more diligently if we were to throw some watermelon rind in there. I guess the only thing that would concern me about doing that is the worms that are already hanging out inside the thing. Throwing a piece of frozen watermelon rind in there after them would be a little bit rude. So for whatever reason I went into bin number 2 to examine how the feeding zone's coming along. I guess now we'll get caught up over here in bin number 1. During our last check-in we took all these nice leaves that had been resting out on the top surface, as well as some of the abundant bedding that had been placed down in the feeding zone that remained, and we blended it all in. The whole system got a good stirring around all over the place, and that kind of makes me feel like, you know, if we wanted to, we could even skip doing that. Although I do definitely like tilling around on the outer edges, even in the places where we're not feeding, just to make sure everything is still okay. And you know, I guess the only thing I was sort of curious of, but we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on it trying to find it, is the skin of the, here it is, the skin of the yam. So it was fair to expect that in here too we would find something quite similar, and that's exactly what we found. I could feel that I've put a few tears into the yam skin on both of them, but that should be okay. We're not trying to like preserve this stuff to make it last and last and last. I think it's more along the lines of us being more interested in seeing it get gobbled up by the worms and consumed and broken down. So what I've got for each feeding zone as far as bedding goes is a couple soiled paper towels, as well as this nice big luxurious napkin. And then into that we can follow up with our old items that we bumped into along the way. So here too, similarly, we're going to be resting out this really large napkin, flanking it with a couple soiled paper towels, and then paving the way for the new feeding by making sure we first returned all the leftovers that we bumped into. And in this case, I guess we've got some leftover feeding zone indicator that we can repurpose, put it down in the feeding zone as supplementary bedding, and now we can get to feeding these little guys. And similar to what we did last time, I do plan on sprinkling some more of this leafy matter out across the top surface when we're done, if I don't forget. So hopefully I'll remember. As for these feeding zones, we'll set these aside and include them on the top covering at the end. And it will be kind of nice to take these leaves that have been resting out here for the past 12 days and get them blended in nicely. So yeah, even after removing those 2 portions of coffee, this thing still has a good bit of weight to it. So stuff came out of the freezer perhaps a half hour ago, and it's starting to thaw already. But you've still got chunks of this potato that are still attached to each other, frozen together. That won't last very long, although on a hot day like today, I would imagine the worms are probably going to enjoy a little respite from the heat while the frozen foods that we're giving them slowly thaw out. They'll perhaps cool down the environment a little bit, and as they thaw out, I'm sure they're also going to emit a good bit of moisture as they soften up and thaw out. So I've got a feeling that those pieces of paper that are right beneath the food we gave them are going to be soaked with a bunch of lovely watermelon juice in no time, probably making that stuff almost as tempting for the worms to consider as a food item as the food itself, even though paper type products are, yes, seen as food just like everything else to a certain degree, but they're also kind of doubling as bedding in a way. So alrighty, there's a lot of springtails in here, and that just tells us there's a good degree of moisture in each system. I was also kind of noting as I bought the system over from the shelf how heavy both of them were. So I was trying to get an early sense, just from the weight of the systems, how close we are to each other in terms of amount of material in each system. Because one thing that we'd spent a little bit of time over the past few check-ins doing was trying to be really generous with the bedding over here in bin number 2 in order to try to build the environment out a little bit more to see if we can increase the volume of the environment, only because we noticed that it was seemingly less, a little bit less than what we noticed in bin number 1. So the whole idea of being generous with bedding here in bin number 2 over the past few check-ins was to see if we can come up with a couple systems that are a little bit more equal in size. And well, the capacity of the containers is the same, it's just how much material occupies each system. And it did seem to me like just going through the exercise of blending everything in and aerating everything throughout both systems would be a good way to, and then obviously leveling it all off afterwards would be a good way to measure, to see how we're doing with regards to equalizing the amount of material in the systems. And I would say beginning with the weight, when I first lifted the systems up earlier, I think we're pretty close to being equal. And not only that, but visually, both systems look very equal as well. Except for the fact that this system, I didn't do as good a job blending in some of this leafy matter, it seems. Although, you know, now I'm reminded we did add a lot more. So perhaps there was just more leftover leafy matter in bin number 2 because of the fact that we were just so much more generous with it in here last time. But this time we don't have to skew anything or try to compensate for any sort of deficiency anywhere. At this point, I think we've definitely gotten to the point where the systems are pretty close to being the same as far as the amount of material in them. Moisture levels seem the same. They keep getting fed pretty equivalently to each other. So I think we've accomplished our goal of coming up with a bin number 2 that's comparable in the amount of material it's got in it to bin number 1, leading us to a couple systems that are a little bit more equal, at least from my eyes. Not that it's all that important, but it was sort of a little short-term objective we gave ourselves a few check-ins ago, and it did seem fair to try to at least acknowledge it and sort of take a measure against our progress to see how we're doing with regards to achieving it. And I would say that we've succeeded in doing just that. Alright everyone, that's it for the check-in with the original Red Wigglers. Not even sure if I mentioned which bins these are. These are the original Red Wigglers, 162 days of age. Today I believe they're receiving feeding number 14. Alright, that's it for the check-in everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Alright everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.